While the delicate sound of Thunder Tour was winding down at the end of the decade, Pink Floyd's ex-bandmate Roger Waters was prepping his own concert extravaganza. While his Radio Chaos tour had proved underwhelming, there was a lot of buzz surrounding a full performance of The Wall at none other than the site of the recently torn Berlin Wall.
I said, well, maybe I would do it. If they ever take the Berlin Wall down, I'll go and do it there, as an act of celebration.
I won't get into a whole history lesson here. Suffice to say, in November of 1989, the wall that had divided West and East Berlin for almost 30 years was torn down, signifying the end of the communist Iron Curtain that had divided Europe. Roger was interested in putting on the wall at the site.
Right next to the Berlin Wall between East and West Berlin is where Roger Waters, a founder member of Pink Floyd, will perform the classic work, The Wall, to raise money for the Memorial Fund for Disaster Relief.
The show was set July 21st, 1990, and it would be an all-star cast. Michael Kamen was back to conduct. Even original designers Mark Fisher and Jonathan Park returned.
I had this fear that Potsdamer Platz was actually mined. I asked the authorities if they could minesweep it. Many grenades and things were found, but most extraordinarily, a former SS bunker was found where Hitler had died.
And they really outdid themselves with production here, the biggest staging of the wall in history.
The wall that we did in Berlin was 20 meters high, 60 feet, and about 300 meters long, because we wanted it to be a huge symbol, because there was going to be such a huge audience.
They got cars, vans, motorcycles driving on the stage, the inflatables were bigger. It's quite the spectacle, and apparently cost $8 million to produce. Roger even had to pay for some of the costs out of pocket. Apparently, Roger even mentioned in passing that he might let David Gilmour play guitar, which, considering this was still only 3 years after their bitter lawsuit, seemed unlikely. But according to David, the idea was on the table for him, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright to perform. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Pink Floyd had reunited with Roger for a full performance of The Wall? Sadly, though, Roger never actually asked them. But the band they got to play the surrogate band for In the Flesh was none other than the Scorpions. Now that's one hell of a surrogate band. The concert mainly follows the original stage shows from the early 80s, although curiously we got Cyndi Lauper singing Another Brick Part 2. Odd choice. It surprisingly works better than I expected. But who could possibly stand in for David Gilmour's iconic guitar solo? Apparently Eric Clapton was invited, but he turned it down. But having Snowy White return from the original Wall tour was a smart choice, considering he always played a solo during the song, along with returning keyboardist Peter Wood. Rick DeFonso also shares some licks with him, along with a guitar solo from Thomas Dolby, in character as the school teacher. Okay, that's just all kinds of awesome. Another curious choice, we have Sinead O'Connor singing Mother, but she sings Pink's role. The role of the mother is actually sung by Levon Helm and Rick Danko of the band, with Garth Hudson on accordion. And it's just a magical moment hearing their voices together with Garth's accordion. To think the band that produced music from Big Pink, the very album that inspired Roger to explore new musical ventures, is sharing the stage with him at this moment. Curiously, that's actually footage of the dress rehearsal for Sinead O'Connor used in post.
We had one or two glitches early on in the show. We lost the sound in Mother, and I found myself tap dancing in front of 300,000 people, because there was nothing else to do.
Some reshoots were staged, but Sinead refused.
So we had to use her performance from the dress rehearsal from the Friday.
Well, I'm sure her career won't be marked by any more controversy. Assuming you've seen my review of the original Wall tour, I don't have much else to say about the concert performances from the first act. Obviously, Roger sings a majority of the material, Joni Mitchell sings Goodbye Blue Sky, Bryan Adams sings Young Lust, Jerry Hall, for some reason, acts out the opening to One of My Turns. They're all okay, but honestly, the visual of the closing in of the wall is the highlight here. But Act 2, which has traditionally been my least favorite part, has some standouts. Paul Carrack sings Hey You. Watching this again, I don't think Paul gets enough credit for how well he sings here, not to mention singing behind a damn wall. I really like this version of Nobody Home. Roger sings it great, the rhythm section adds some much needed dynamics, and Snowy White plays a guitar solo without having to stand in the shadow of one of Dave Gilmour's iconic solos. Van Morrison sings a surprisingly stirring version of Comfortably Numb, with Levon Helm and Rick Danko backing him up. Though as good a job as Snowy and Rick DeFonso do on the guitar solo, David Gilmour's absence is felt, especially on Run Like Hell. Roger sings it by himself, and it just doesn't have the same intensity as the version that Dave and Roger sang together on the Is There Anybody Out There version. On the other hand, I have mentioned before that the trial is acted out by actual theater performers, including Albert Finney as the judge, Marion Faithfull as the mother, and Tim Curry kicking things off as the prosecutor. What was it the other guy said in our wall review?
Tim Curry? In the wall? How is that not a perfect fit?
Of course, you got a huge pig plowing from top of the wall. Everyone shouts, "Tear down the wall," as it comes crumbling down. It's almost like this show was made for this in the wake of the real Berlin Wall coming down. And then we get to the final song, Outside the Wall. Hello Song from Radio Chaos. Yeah, this was actually released as a single, with vocals being split between Roger, Joni Mitchell, Cyndi Lauper, Bryan Adams, Van Morrison, and Paul Carrack. Given the situation of the wall coming down, I'd say this song is appropriate, and it's actually the best version. Honestly, this concert is much better than I remember. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that, in terms of visualizing the stage show, this is the way to watch it. I may prefer the music from the original Pink Floyd tour, and do miss Dave, Rick, and Nick's contributions here. But as I've said, the wall was made for the stage, and you really do get a chance to experience the size and scope watching this concert. Sadly, sales of the album and video didn't bring in the numbers the charity was hoping for, and in polling my followers, it doesn't seem like it's anyone's favorite version, but it has been released on DVD if you want to check it out. But I know what you're all waiting for, my thoughts on Roger Waters' Amused to Death. His third studio album, released in 1992, produced with Patrick Leonard, who you might recall contributed to Momentary Lapse of Reason, engineered by James Guthrie, who did The Wall, and fortunately, third time was a charm for Roger.
They will love this record. They will lock themselves away and play it and play it and play it and play it, and it will not disappoint them.
As I mentioned in the Final Cut review, I felt the post-war dream concept, while intriguing, didn't really come together or have standout musical moments. Amused to Death is that concept fully realized, focusing this time on the sensationalism of war on cable TV, especially considering this was written during the Gulf War. And a big reason for this album being a standout is because of Jeff Beck. I fucking love Jeff Beck. Everything he touches is gold, and this album is no exception. Even the opening track, The Ballad of Bill Hubbard, juxtaposes the voice of World War I veteran Alfred Razzle with Jeff's beautiful playing. It's a sublime way to begin the album. And when Razzle's chilling story is interrupted by the voice of a child saying how much they like watching war on TV, we're introduced to the best track Roger wrote post-Floyd, What God Wants. Seriously, this track friggin' rocks with Jeff wailing away, a catchy chorus, and lyrics that almost sound George Carlin-esque.
All that religious bullshit when it's used to bolster our side in a war is extremely distasteful and offensive. The theatre of the album is characterized as a monkey, a gorilla specifically, watching television. And so I use the gorilla as a metaphor, I suppose, for the human race.
I also love when the song reprises later in the record, featuring Roger Rabbit as a TV evangelist. Or at least his voice actor, Charles Fleischer. And the third part becomes a slow ballad, with some Echoes-type soundscapes, another epic solo from Jeff Beck, and a very mournful vocal from Roger. I also love Three Wishes. Just lyrically, this very unique poem of a man questioning 3 wishes from a genie that he already used up.
There's something fundamentally sound in the reasoning of be careful what you wish for.
Roger and his wife Caroline were getting divorced at the time, so he's definitely channeling feelings of remorse, but that's the way it goes. Side note, that's Peter Boyle playing the genie in the video. And the final track, Amused to Death, is another standout featuring vocals by Rita Coolidge.
Is a steal from a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death.
The song wraps up the concept, pointing out the demise of the human race from consumerism and the reliance of technology, and the alien anthropologists come to one simple conclusion.
This species has amused itself to death.
Now that's timely. So, is this a perfect record? Does it all make perfect sense? Well, I do still have some of the same issues as on the final cut. Not as many, this time it feels fresh, Roger's in rare form, but there are a lot of slow, mournful tunes in a row. Roger's talk singing can get a bit stale for my tastes. And sometimes it does feel like there's a disconnect between the lyrics and the music. Take Bravery of Being At a Range, for example. I like the hard-driving guitar, and I really like the lyrics carrying on this theme of war being broadcast like a sporting event. But the words bravery of being out of range don't really make for an engaging chorus. To be fair, in watching videos of Roger discuss this project, I think there was meant to be a sort of stream of consciousness approach to these songs.
The lyrics are better if I have no part in them. The more passive I am about it, the better it is. The less craft and the more connection with whatever it is out there, the better.
But the other thing I noticed is that Roger never really talks about the music itself. He talks a lot about the lyrics, concepts, politics, world events of the time, and other recent events that don't have much to do with the album. But outside of Jeff Beck's guitar playing, he doesn't really mention the musical side of things that much. This further displays the difference between Roger Waters and David Gilmour and Rick Wright in their approach to songwriting.
Wish somebody help me write this song.
I still like the album and do recommend it, but even with Jeff Beck's guitar work, there is something missing musically. Regardless, many Floyd fans consider this the best solo album from any member of Pink Floyd. Even Roger himself holds it up there with Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. The biggest problem is Roger didn't tour this album. While the album sold well, it wasn't enough for Roger to commit to a full run of concerts. I guess I can't blame him after having been burnt by 2 tours and The Wall in Berlin. But man, if he had performed this album live with Jeff Beck, it could have been a killer. And we wouldn't hear from Roger Waters again until the end of the decade. As for Pink Floyd, well, join me in the next video.